Good morning, church. Great to see you today. If you're visiting, my name is Phil Brookman, and I am the preacher here, and this is a great church. I love this church. Glad you are here with us this morning. We started a new series last week. It's really a big series, which will last the whole year, called Love One Another. But throughout the year, we're doing lots of sub-series, which speak to that big idea. So last week we started a series called Stars in the Sky. This is week 2 of that message. A few weeks ago, I was at Summit with almost 300 of us. Every other year we do a church retreat in Colorado. And one night after the devotional, there was this random collection of people gathered around a table and started playing this game, a game that I had never played until this night. It's a game called Slapsy. Raise your hand if you have played Slapsy before. Great, so I can teach everybody how to play. So one reason I love this night, because I had never played with this collection of people, just random. Everybody just sat down. It was Nick and Jennifer Gocher, Ashley Jennings, Kaylee Mendenhall, Brody Gustafson. I might be forgetting someone, but we started playing this game, and here's how it works. One card is placed in the center of the table, which describes something. So, for example, a card might be placed in the center of the table saying used for transportation. Every player has cards in their hand, and these are just pictures, nouns. And if you have a card that you think matches the description, you put it down in the middle, similar to apples to apples. So, for example, on this one, I actually remember someone put motorcycle out and someone put feet out. And so what happens when 2 people or 3 or 4 put a card in the middle is, at least this is the way we played, each person is able to defend why their card is the best picture of this description. So on this particular round, I know it was Nick versus Brody. I forget who played what card, but one of them passionately argued that feet is the best object for this phrase used for transportation. And the argument was, it was historical. Since the beginning of time, the primary mode of transportation has been feet. So you got longevity on this side of the argument. But then the other one, I think it was Nick, he argued back and said, he used what I would call the simplicity argument. And he said something like, okay, well, yes, feet might be the historic means of transportation, but it can also be used for other things. You could kick somebody, you can put a toe ring on. Whereas the motorcycle, there's nothing else that it does. It is one single purpose. It is to give you transportation. It was I felt like it was in a courtroom. It was incredible. As an aside, just for fun here, which one would you have voted for if you had heard these arguments? Do you think feet is the primary means of transportation, or would you say motorcycle? Who says feet? Who says motorcycle? Okay. Honestly, I don't 100% remember who won this round. I think it was motorcycle, but it was a heated debate. And it's actually what I loved about this game is it produced high-octane arguing. I have never so passionately defended that push pins are more likely to be in a desk than batteries. But I was up out of my chair just going crazy because I really wanted to defend my position here. So we all played for an hour. I think Kelly Mendenhall won the game. But then what was amazing is the game was over and we kept talking. It was fine. We could argue pretty passionately, but then move on. And so here's what I got to thinking about. I was walking to my room that night and I got to thinking, well, the reason that we could just move on is because everybody knows the actual stakes of the game are nothing. We're talking about nonsense, so you can move on from an argument. But then I started thinking, what if the cards were emotionally, religiously, politically charged issues of our day? How would the game have gone differently? So hypothetically, imagine this scenario. You're playing this game, and someone puts the card in the middle of the table, things that matter, and then 7 or 8 people put these cards out. Can you imagine what would happen? Whew! I mean, you talk about arguing. This would be a train wreck. I mean, people would say things they regret. Relationships would end. This would be a nightmare. Okay, you can take those pictures off the screen. So this is really sad. This stat I read in a book recently. I tried to find this stat from 2020 and I couldn't find it, but Reuters survey did this right after the 2016 election, and they found that 38 million Americans stopped talking to a family member or a friend because of conflicts created by the election. Isn't that sad? See, conflict doesn't have to be negative. It can actually accomplish something. If you think about the last time you traveled, you probably had interpersonal conflict with somebody. Where are we going to go? Where are we going to eat? Did you pack this or that? Who has the bags? There's always conflict when it comes to travel, but it's temporary. You talk about it, you disagree, but then you come to a solution and you move on. That's actually healthy conflict, and we all need that kind of conflict. You engage in something, it has a goal, a purpose, and you solve it, and then you move on. But there are other kinds of conflict where you sit in it for a really, really long time, and sometimes relationships end. 38 million people stopped talking because of those issues. Now, back in 2016 is 8 years ago, so sometimes we even forget what those issues were. So people were arguing about Hillary's emails back then, and people were arguing about Russian interference with the election, and those issues caused families and friendships to dissolve. And so here's the opening question I want to ask you today. It's kind of an obvious one. It's rhetorical. Is that what you want your story to be this year? Do you want to get to the end of 2024 and say, yeah, the issues were just so significant that I lost 3 friends on this cycle? They didn't see eye to eye with me. I was right. They were obviously wrong. And I cared so deeply about X, Y, and Z that, yes, I have lost these 3 friendships. Or do you want your story to be, well, I've had a great year with my adult daughter, but wow, that election cycle happened, and then I couldn't talk to her anymore. So no, I'm going to take a break. I don't know the next time I'm going to talk to my daughter because of the conflict we had. Of course you don't want that to be your story. Nobody wants that to be their story. In fact, I would argue that for these 38 million Americans in 2016, they didn't want that to be their story either, that these relationships would end, and yet they did. Well, the good news is you don't have to make that your story. The good news is you do have a choice. So if you were with us last week, we started this new series, Like Stars in the Sky, and the big idea behind it is that you and I do not have to capitulate to a world in outrage. Now, our country's going to hate each other, and there's going to be a lot of anger, but you don't have to be caught up in it. I don't have to be caught up in it. We can live a different kind of life. In fact, not only can we live differently, we've been called to live differently. So the sentence where this series comes from the book of Philippians, where Paul says, don't complain and don't argue with each other, and then you shine. You shine like stars in the sky. And so we don't have to be caught up in it. We can be informed, but we don't have to hate each other. In fact, when we do that, we actually will shine, and that's what the world needs. And so last week, it was one simple idea. Last week, we opened off with the idea that your character, at the end of the day, will outshine your intelligence. Not that intelligence is a bad thing. I think reading and being educated is super important, but at the end of the day, it's how you treat people. It's your character that's going to shine, or conversely, it's your lack of character that's going to make you a very dim presence in the world. And so today, one more simple idea to communicate as we traverse this series of shining like stars. So I want to go to the Old Testament today, 1 Kings 12. 1 Kings 12 is arguably the most significant conflict in the Bible. And so the backstory of this passage is this. So Old Testament, God raises up Abraham pretty early, and he says, I'm going to bless you, and you're going to go bless the nations. And this is God's plan from day one, at least with Abraham, this is how God wants the whole world to come back from the fall of Genesis 3. And so there's lots of twists and turns through the Old Testament. This dream is hardly realized. The story of Judges is awful, and then people try to get to the Promised Land, and they just can't quite get it. But then you get to the three kings, Saul, David, Solomon, and we get close, especially with the reign of David. Israel becomes this geopolitical people, and they build the temple, and other people do start coming to Israel to meet this Yahweh. In fact, a great story from Solomon's era is the Queen of Sheba travels to Israel because she has heard about Solomon and about Israel and about this nation who worships Yahweh, and they seem to be flourishing. And so she comes just to visit the nation, and there's this great line in the middle of her story where she simply says, "Praise be to the Lord your God." And that's what was supposed to happen. All these nations were to come to Israel to meet Yahweh. Well, after this incident, things really start to unravel. So 1 Kings 12 tells the story of how after King Solomon dies, groups start forming in Israel. People take sides. People start to argue because one group thinks the nation should run one way and another group thinks the nation should go the other way. And then the arguing gets worse and worse and worse. And then eventually there's violence. And then eventually this war breaks out. And then finally, and very sadly, the nation of Israel splits into two. Judah to the south, Israel to the north, and they never get back together. So arguably, this is the most significant conflict, at least in the Old Testament. This is the division of Israel as a nation. So how exactly did this happen? Well, when you look at this story, and really you can look at most passages in the Bible with these two levels of questions. One really helpful question in biblical interpretation is this: what does this tell us about God? A second really helpful question is, what does this tell us about people and humanity? So when you look at 1 Corinthians 12 through the God question, it says a lot about the sovereignty of the covenant God who doesn't give up on his people. But I want to look at, what do we learn about human beings through this story? So here's what happens. Solomon dies. His son Rehoboam comes to power, and the first problem that he has to deal with is the people are complaining because the commoners are having to work really, really hard to keep all the projects that Solomon had started going. And so they send a representative, Jeroboam, to go before Rehoboam, I know it's confusing, to say, hey, you've got to lighten the load of the people. And so Rehoboam hears this, and he thinks to himself, well, I've got to get some advice here. So first he goes to the advisors of his dad, these old guys that helped King Solomon out. And Rehoboam asks them, what do you think I should do? The people say that the work is hard. They want me to lighten the load. What do I do? And these advisors say, well, if you want to be a good king, you need to listen. Listen to your people. Lighten the load. And so Rehoboam says, okay, well, thanks for that, but I'm going to go to my other advisors here. So then Rehoboam goes to his own contemporaries, these younger advisors, and he asks them the same question: what do you think I should do? And they give him a very different answer. They say, no. If you want to be a king, you've got to let them know who's in charge. You do not lighten the load. You do not listen to these people. You tell them what's up. Well, that's my translation. And so here's what they say that he should actually tell the people. So here's the speech they say he should give. And now, whereas my father laid on you a heavy yoke, I will add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions. So you can just hear the disdain in their voice for the other. And sadly, this is exactly what Rehoboam does. He goes to these people, he gives them this speech, then the people rebel, then there is violence, and then the entire nation splits from this moment, and they never recover. Now, here's one of the things I find interesting about this story. If you know your Bible, you're probably familiar with this story, but Rehoboam is not introduced as a menacing character in this text. He's just introduced as the son of Solomon. And in the first few lines, he seems like a good guy. He's judicious, he's wise. In fact, the people want him to be the king. So he has, over the years, developed some positive reputation. When the people bring this problem to him, he waits 3 days before answering. That's smart. He's being wise. He's being judicious. This is what a good king should do. So he's not presented as a villain in the story. So then what happens? How does this go from, in theory, good conflict? Yeah, the people have a problem. We should talk about it, come up with a solution. How does it go from that to the whole nation falls apart? Everybody gets mad at each other. Like, what is really going on? It has everything to do with Rehoboam talking to these young contemporaries who stir him up. Now, we don't know a lot about these people. The text just doesn't say a whole lot, but apparently they take him from somewhere on the 2 or 3 range of anger and rage up to an 8 or a 9. And so by the time he gets done talking to these guys, he is so furious. So the presence of these people in the story reveals this very significant truth, which is this: there are certain people in your life, there are certain institutions, there are certain technologies which serve to increase your anger. Or in other words, when you get in a conflict with somebody else, or when you're mad about something, oftentimes that is not because you have been internally convicted. Rather, it's because you've been externally manipulated. There are lots of institutions, lots of people, lots of things going on in the world which serve to make you angry. In fact, I read a book called High Conflict recently, best-selling book by Amanda Ripley, and she has this fascinating term in the middle of her book. She calls these kinds of institutions conflict entrepreneurs. And here's a great quote. Here's what she says about them. She says, "The pursuit of revenge," if you go to the next slide, "can bond us together in our own groups, delivering a sense of exhilaration and mission. Conflict entrepreneurs understand this. And so they talk about conflict like it is a religion unto itself, a way to make sense of the world and our place in it, a sacred flame that must never be extinguished." I think she's on to something here. There are certain people, certain institutions, certain companies, not only do they serve to increase your anger, but some of these institutions actually benefit from your anger. So, for example, there was an extensive study done in 2021 about the kinds of emotions which produce the most online engagement. And the number one emotion which produces the most clicks, most likes, most shares is rage. It's anger. So if these companies can make you mad, the theory goes that you will be on these apps longer, or you will watch that show for longer, and therefore these commercials, these companies will make more money because your eyeballs are on that screen. So it's not only that these institutions, the people and companies are just making you angry, they benefit from making you angry. So this is why YouTube will get you to click on a video by titling it so-and-so, and then all caps, destroys so-and-so in some argument. And they'll know what you want to hear, and so that's very clickable. Oh yeah, I want to hear that because that agrees with me. Or the way that cable news keeps your eyeballs on the screen is by constantly having someone else on the screen that the person you like is making fun of or belittling, and that incites your anger, and so you'll look at that for longer. This is how companies make money. In other words, this is so weird to think about, but they make money by making anger. The more money they make is dependent on the angrier that their audience is, and so they're trying to make us angry. That's what conflict entrepreneurs do. Now, it doesn't just have to be digital. A lot of it is, but sometimes it's just people. You've got people in your life that when you are around a specific person, they just stir you up. They make you angrier than you were before you were with them. In fact, another great story from this book is about Tricia and Julia Nixon. So these are the daughters of former President Richard Nixon. And early on, best friends. Tricia was the maid of honor in Julia's wedding. So fast forward to 1997, Richard Nixon dies, and the his extensive libraries are left to these two daughters. And when I say extensive, I mean buildings worth of books. It's a massive collection. Well, these two sisters get in an argument on how the collection should be stewarded. One of the sisters says, we've got to keep this in the family. And the other sister says, no, this is just too big. We need to hire another management firm and let someone else manage this extensive collection. So it became quite an argument. But then there was a turning point in the argument where it went from bad to really bad, and then from really bad to just awful. And the turning point happened when other people started to get involved in the argument. So first it was family. A few other family members took sides. Then it was their friends. Friends started to take sides in the argument. Then the library got involved. The staff itself, they landed on both sides of the argument. And then the board of the library got involved, and they were on either side of the argument. And it got to the point where the sisters hired not just one, but two lawyers each to start to figure out what to do about this conflict. And then the media got involved. And so no longer was it just two sisters having a little fight, having a little argument. We're talking 30, 40, 50, 100 people on each side, and they cannot figure things out. Multiple lawsuits were filed. At one point, this is 5 years into the conflict, somebody wanted to give $20 million as a gift to this library. And the sisters couldn't even accept the gift because there was so much turmoil in how this would be managed. So what's going on here is conflict entrepreneurs. It's one thing if it's just two people who disagree, but now you have all these other institutions involved, and it's making it a lot worse. And so, yes, it can be digital, but it can just be a person too. So here, let me get practical. Let's get into your world and to my world. Here's a few questions to think about. Question number one: who are the conflict entrepreneurs in my life? So think about your own life. Who are the people? What are the shows? Who are the people you follow online that just make you mad? Like who are they? Is it a friend? Is it someone you're about to see in the hallway? Is it someone in your Bible class? Is it a person you sit across from at work? And when you're with that person, they just stir you up. Or is it your favorite show that you watch, your favorite news, or someone you follow, and every time you read this person, every time you look at what this show has to say, you just find yourself angry? Who are the conflict entrepreneurs in your life? You have to identify them. Here's a different way to ask the question, which maybe will make you think about a different person. What stimulus makes me less likely to love my enemy? So think about this one. What show do you watch that after you're done watching it, you cannot stand the other side? Or what person are you with? And when you leave that person or a group, you're like, I hate those people. What stimulus makes me less likely to love my enemy? Because the reality is, and I'm talking about myself here, I am often unaware of how these groups or companies or technologies are even affecting me. I'm just in it. So for example, the other day, I get on a particular social media platform mainly to look up something. I just need to find some information. But sure enough, something pops up in my feed that somebody I know has written something, and it triggers me. And I think, what? How could he write that? First of all, I don't even agree with the content of what he wrote. But then secondly, why would he think that putting that online would contribute anything to the world? Like, well, what is going on here? This is going to do nothing for society. All it's going to do is to cause more people just to look at their screens and be angry, which ironically, that's what I was doing at the moment. It is all in my head. I'm on my soapbox about this guy who posts this and I don't like it. And so then I start reading the comments. Isn't that a great idea? So I'm scrolling down. All these people are saying things. And then I find one from this lady that I literally have not talked to her or seen her in 15 years. And she says something that I don't like either. I'm like, what? What happened to her? What is wrong with her? So then I get on her profile and start reading all the things she said over the years. Like, it was half an hour goes by and I'm just furious. Now, whose fault is that? That's my fault. because I got caught up in this system that was already happening and that wanted my anger, and I fed right into it. Social media won. They got me really mad, and they got my eyeballs on my phone for 30 minutes. This was my fault. And to make it worse, at the end of that half hour, do you think I was more or less likely to love my enemy? Way less. So think about this in your life. What stimulus, this is a great just litmus test question for all of the people in media intake. What stimulus makes you less likely to love your neighbor? Here's a third bonus question, not on the screen, but just think about this. Who do you stir up? Here's the sad reality. Most likely someone in the room in the last 5 minutes just thought of you as their conflict entrepreneur. So think about that. Like, is there someone that you get around this person and you make them mad? Maybe you don't even realize you're doing it. Are you causing harm for somebody else's life? So what do we do now? So let's say you've identified, okay, it's this person is in this show, and okay, I get it, Phil. There's people that are making me really mad. So what do we do? Colossians 3. This is the practical point of Paul's letter. And he says very simply, but now you must also rid yourselves of all such things as these. Say these first two words with me. Anger, rage. Say them one more time. Anger, rage. Isn't that funny that those are the very first two things on his list? And then malice and slander and then filthy language from your lips. So Paul says you got to get rid of it. You can't be a disciple and be angry all the time. You can't follow Jesus if you're always full of rage. So how do you get rid of these things? Well, one option is just to grit your teeth and just say to yourself, stop being angry, stop being angry, stop being angry. Probably won't work very well. Another option is you distance yourself from the gasoline that's fueling the fire. In other words, if you stop spending time around people that make you angry, then you're not going to be as angry. So almost imagine just fictitiously that someone's been in the mud with pigs all day long, and then they come home and they don't want to smell like the pigs, and so they just put a bunch of cologne or perfume on themselves, hoping to mask the scent. Well, yeah, that's one way to get rid of the scent. The other way to get rid of the scent is to stop wrestling in the mud with the pigs. And so some of us, what do you expect if you're spending hours of your week with these conflict entrepreneurs which are designed to make you really mad? Of course you're going to be angry. And so what you can do is you can distance yourself from the gasoline that's fueling the fire. This is not just about you being a more well-rounded, happy person, which I do think if you and I could learn how to do this, we'll be less anxious people. More to the point, what's at stake here is the cause of Christ. Yes, the next few months is an opportunity for the church to shine, but sadly, the next few months is also an opportunity for the church to fail. And so when you and I get sucked up into the games of other institutions wanting to make us mad, it's not just us and our well-being that suffers, it's the very reputation of Jesus in the world that suffers. I read, in one of the books I read recently, someone said, when you act like a jerk, God gets the bad Yelp review. And there's truth to that sentiment. Like, can you imagine that if later this year, come Christmas time, someone approaches you and says, yeah, I was actually thinking about becoming a Christian, but then I saw how you acted. And then I thought, wow, if that's what Jesus people do, I want nothing to do with the church. So this is much more than just your emotional well-being. The reputation of the church, the reputation of Jesus is at stake in the world. And this is why it's so important that you and I learn how to shine. So 2002, a judge orders Trisha and Julia to go to a hotel in Florida. He says, you can't bring anybody except you can each bring one lawyer. There'll be no family, there'll be no friends, there'll be no media. And they went into this room. They stationed police officers outside the door just in case things got really bad. And they started talking. There was one conflict mediator in the room. They spent a few hours trying to work out the conflict, didn't make a whole lot of progress. At 2 a.m, Trisha and Julia went off by themselves. So now, no lawyers, no judge, no conflict mediator, just 2 sisters. They go off to a side room. About an hour later, they emerge, and the conflict is resolved. This conflict, which took 5 years, was then resolved in about 24 hours. And how did it happen? It's because the conflict entrepreneurs were finally sidelined. And once they were sidelined, then the conversation could become productive again. So I want you to imagine what your life would look like if you didn't have all these conflict entrepreneurs. Imagine for Rehoboam what his legacy would have looked like as a king if he hadn't been so caught up in these young contemporaries who just made him madder and madder and madder. It'd be a totally different story. Imagine what your life would look like if you weren't around that person that made you mad all the time. Imagine what your life would look like if you didn't spend so much time on that particular platform or with that particular show that just makes you mad. I'm not saying you're not informed. You stay informed, but you just don't do it over and over and over again. Or imagine some of you you're just having some issue with one person in your life. But now you've got 6 or 7 or 10 other people talking about it, and it's so complex. And you no longer see the one person that you actually have an issue with because everybody else is talking about it. Imagine if you could just part the seas and just have a conversation with that one person. Can you imagine how much better your life would be? And to be honest, some of you are really already good at this. I love being around you people that are really good at this. Because those of you that know how to do this, you are calm. You remind me that Jesus is Lord. You remind me that there's nothing that happens outside the sovereignty of God. You remind me that everything is going to be okay, and I love spending time with you. But others of you have some work to do. You might have to rethink some habits. You might have to rethink some relationships. But here's the good news. If you do this, if you could just create a little bit of distance from those people in your life, you will become more like Jesus was. There's so many images of the life of Jesus I could talk about, but I'll just go to one. He's on the cross. And he's got through with this contentious conversation with Pilate, first of all, and then you've got the people who've been shouting, crucify him, and you've got the Pharisees who are ridiculing him, and you've got the soldiers who are mocking him. In other words, Jesus on the cross is at the center of everybody else's conflict, and what is he offering? Peace. Jesus, more than any human that has ever lived, understood how to live in a context of conflict, but offers something totally different. We talked about this about 2 months ago. It's way easier to be an extension cord, metaphorically, and be a conduit for everybody else's anger. It's much harder to be a water filter and let the anger of others come into your heart, but give back to the world something completely different. This is what Jesus did, and it's what we are called to do. And the good news is the more time you spend with Jesus, the more you become like Jesus. James 4, one of my favorite passages. We've been talking about this in my family devotionals at night with my girls lately. James says, resist the devil and he'll flee from you. And then this amazing promise, draw near to God and God draws near to you. So if you spend your time distancing yourself from the gasoline that's fueling the fire and then change your direction to coming into the presence of the mighty, benevolent, gracious God, you will find yourself less anxious. You'll find yourself like Jesus was, modeling peace in the middle of a storm. And I believe we can do it. And just last week, like I said, if we do it together, wow, we're going to make a big difference in this community. So we're going to sing now, and if you have something going on in your heart, in your life, that you need our shepherds to pray for, they're going to be in the back, and they love to pray with you and bless you, minister to you. And if you would like to get baptized into the name of Jesus Christ, I'll be down front to receive you. Let's stand. Let's sing.